Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider. It's been kind of a little bit of a tumultuous week, tumultuous past couple of days. Some big news, obviously, in the country, but we are not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about Bengals football, and I'm joined by my two regular co-hosts, Connor Howe and Scott Schultz. Scott, how are you doing?
Great. I was trying to think of something more clever to say. That's all I had.
Well, I mean, for those watching, Scott is wearing a University of Dayton hat, correct?
Yes, they are starting their season this Sunday or Friday.
So not one you see too often, but obviously your neck of the woods is probably pretty popular, right?
Yeah, probably a little more so than San Diego.
Yeah.
Well, he's representing. You gotta respect that. I love it. Connor, my West Coast comrade, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. I mean, it feels like it's been so long since we've watched Bengals football, and we still have, as of tonight, like 5 more days, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. That's way too long.
It is a long time, and though it stinks that the Bengals essentially lost a home game by traveling to London, they did get a very long, not only a bye week, but an extra day even because they play Monday night against the Giants, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But last week, the Bengals during their bye week were very, very busy. I mean, a lot of players, if you will follow them on social media and whatnot, they're on little mini vacations and all this stuff. But the Bengals brought in a number of people to try out, and we record this show on Wednesdays. And the very next day after we recorded, the Bengals, lo and behold, signed a very familiar face in Wallace Gilberry. That was probably the one most would figure would come back and be here for the Bengals. So, Scott, I'll start with you. Do you see this as a move of desperation? Do you see it as a move that'll be effective for the Bengals, or do you see it as just kind of a ho-hum type of maneuver by a team that's maybe trying to instill something into the fan base?
It seems kind of strange, I think, if you look at who they signed, because back in 2012 and 13, he had 14 sacks as a backup, and I think kind of wowed a lot of people when we picked him up after Kansas City had released him, and like, wow, this is incredible. This guy came out of nowhere. He had those 2 big years, and then since then, so 2014, 15, and so far this year, he's played a few games. He only has 3.5 sacks. He's not the same player he was as a backup. He's turning 32 next month, so I'm not really sure what they're expecting from him. And although, granted, we've seen on the Cincy Jungle site that a lot of people are pretty well done, more or less, with Hunt and Clark. So I think most people would say, well, it can't be any worse, kind of a mentality. Although it seemed like on the website, the biggest angst we got was who we cut to make room for him, or who we waived, I guess. I don't know if what the technical term is. I guess it's waived, not cut.
Yeah.
But he was, a lot of folks really seemed upset we let go of Chris Lewis Harris. And I think one thing that at least to me, what it screamed, and I don't know if I didn't see a whole lot of comment to this regard, but was the idea that it seems to me that the Bengals pretty much are planning on William Jackson III being the guy they're bringing back from the IR designation. And if that's the case, it seems like Chris Lewis Harris was the one they were probably going to cut. And if you kind of look at him, he's going to be 28 here in a couple months. He's not really a project anymore. It was kind of a nice story when they kind of brought him out of nowhere from Tennessee, Chattanooga, or wherever he came from. But he's been on the team 4.5 years, has never really been a starter. I have to assume the Bengals are figuring we're bringing William Jackson back. He was going to get cut at some time. We might as well just cut him now because we don't see a future, which is kind of sad because he does look good in the preseason. He has looked good in the snaps. He just doesn't get a lot of them. So I guess I can't really say I'm as heartbroken about him leaving because obviously the team must see a lot with William Jackson. I know he came back to practice recently, so I think the team was probably figuring, hey, he's going to go at some point. We might as well let him go now. I just am not quite sure what Gilberry gives them unless they're just ready to say, yeah, we're just done with Hunter Clark. We don't see a future with them. We're going to bring a 32-year-old guy in who may not have much left in the tank and just, I don't know if it's just a spark, a push, what it is. It almost seemed like a move to make a move.
Right. And the Bengals pass rush hasn't been awful this year. It's just kind of been inconsistent. To backpedal just a minute about Chris Lewis Harris, I've met the guy personally, and he is a heck of a nice guy. And I don't know if you guys know, I used to coach a little bit, and from a coach's standpoint, the guy does everything you ask of him. And I know it probably was a difficult decision for those coaches to let him go, but he has been a guy that has done a lot of positive things for the team. And, now the Ravens picked him up, and we'll see if he has any kind of contributions over there. But I don't know. That's who was shown the door for Gilberry. Now, Connor, you have been a big, especially early in the season when they were playing well, you've been a big booster of Will Clark, Margus Hunt, and they had played well through the first stretch of the games, but have really fallen off, along with many aspects of the team, really fallen off these past few weeks in terms of production. So do you see Gilberry maybe helping them in a weird way because of other rotations they're going to bring in, and those guys will still see some time? Do you see him eating into their time? Do you see this as an effective move for the team and maybe provide some sort of defensive spark after they've struggled this year?
I mean, if anything, I just think it's going to be like a spark, like you said. I mean, we all talked about Gilberry. I don't know if we had the podcast around during the offseason, but on Cincy Jungle, at the very least, we were talking about Gilberry as a guy who we all expected and thought should go because it wasn't a right fit with the Bengals. He wasn't the productive player he once was, and even with Margus Hunt and Will Clark, although I think you put it well in that their production has fallen off. I mean, they've still had some nice plays here and there, but they haven't had the statistics, the blocked field goal, Will Clark's early season sacks that were more than the rest of the team at one point. And so you look at it from that standpoint, it's easy to understand why you want a guy who's a veteran, who's put up those numbers before. But we saw last year, Wallace Gilberry had plenty of chances, didn't really put any numbers on paper, didn't really provide that big of a spark. Personally, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens if or when Brandon Thompson comes back. I personally think he's the best interior pass rusher that isn't on the roster for the Bengals at this point. In terms of like when you're comparing him versus Gilberry, I think Thompson's probably the better player. Whether or not he can effectively play after coming back from injury remains to be seen. But I think you guys made a good point with William Jackson coming back. Personally, I think if the Bengals consider themselves a playoff team, you go with Pearman, just because he's a guy who people say, oh, William Jackson can play special teams. The role that Pearman plays on special teams is different than the role Jackson plays on special teams. It's not just like everyone just lies in a high school or a middle school flag football game where you have the starters and the backups and you just throw all the backups on the field. The very strategic element of special teams, and Pearman's a guy who requires double and triple teams oftentimes on kickoffs. That all being said, I think it was a little overblown, the backlash against the whole Chris Lewis Harris fallout. He's made some plays. He's also been inconsistent, just like the guy who stayed on the roster, Chikey, however you pronounce it, Brown, which I still have no idea how you pronounce that name, but people were definitely pissed off about him being on the roster versus Lewis Harris, which if you watch the preseason, they were pretty even. I think another player who is still surprisingly on the roster, Jeff Driscoll, it's strange that he's still there. He's still on the roster, right?
Yep.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think he's still on the active roster.
Yeah. I mean, that was a surprising thing. So obviously, I mean, they had to cut a guy. They didn't have to cut a corner, and the fact that they're keeping Driscoll around is definitely interesting. I think it's going to make for some more A.J. McCarron trade rumors during the offseason. I think the Bengals are probably going to execute a trade at some point because I don't know. I really don't know what's to make of all of it. They have, I think, 12 they're slated to have 12 draft picks in the upcoming draft. Maybe you trade McCarron, regain some extra picks so that you can move up in slots that you have. I don't know. It'll be interesting, but in terms of the whole Gilberry signing, long story short, I don't think it's going to change much. But I think there's certain intangible aspects, such as just veteran leadership and energy he can bring, and just another body in the mix that is definitely something that could potentially change things. Not that it will probably change things very much, but who knows. So It was a very low risk, medium, I would say, reward signing, and so you got to do that and just see where things go.
Yeah, and the rotation and the familiarity that he has in this defense is obviously why he was brought in there. And I do think they view him as somewhat of a leader, especially with his tenure over the Bengals. But yeah, the other thing too is the Bengals also have Kavare Russell. They have Chucky Brown, as you mentioned, as guys that are possible cuts. I think Pierman and William Jackson could actually both return if they end up doing that. But we'll see. I think he can only bring back one, right? Yeah. So
I think you made a good point. Also, the whole Kivari Russell thing. I think maybe he's ready in his development. The Bengals are confident enough in him because Lewis Harris wasn't like not playing, right? Like he at least saw some snaps. Maybe Russell's at that point where the Bengals are ready to see what he has, and if he plays well, Jackson on IR, if the Bengals are in contention to bring back Pierman. So it'll be interesting.
So those are the updates this week in terms of personnel moves. The Bengals also brought in 4 different kickers. You can listen to last week's episode. We talked extensively about that, and they also brought in Marcel Reese. None of those have been signed to this point, although those were very interesting tryouts and workouts by the Bengals in bringing those guys in. But that's kind of the update in terms of personnel at this point. Gilberry in, Chris Lewis Harris out, and hopefully the Bengals made the right decision there and boost their pass rush, which has been a bit inconsistent this year. The Bengals, though, they travel once again, even though they've had a big break, they travel to London and now they travel to New York to take on the Giants on Monday Night Football. The Giants have been a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde team, guys. They're 5-3. They have a very, very explosive offense. They can have that with Eli Manning when he's on. Obviously, Odell Beckham. They have Victor Cruz. They've got a bunch of other guys that have helped them out both this year and in previous years. Their losses, I'm looking at it, they lost by 2 points to the Redskins in week 3. They lost by 14 points to the Vikings in week 4. And then they lost to the Packers by 7 points in week 5. But they are 5-3 currently right now and playing some pretty decent football. Scott, Marvin Lewis has not been great out of buys. And obviously, whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not, he also has been very, very poor in these primetime games. And really the ones that this team has been able to win in primetime have been against poor teams and not ones that are 5-3 and playing on their home turf. Does this matchup scare you? Do you think the extended bye week, the addition of Gilberry and kind of collecting themselves, do you think that is a big advantage for the Bengals as they go into MetLife Stadium?
Well, I think the whole thing with him and Dalton and the team kind of struggling in primetime, I used to think it was, well, they just aren't preparing. It's a big stage. I'm now kind of convinced it's just they were playing good teams because generally the idea was, Monday night, Sunday night, you're getting the better team, the national audience. And if you look at his record in the playoffs, obviously it's not very good, or teams that make the playoffs, they just tend to have a very bad record against good teams, which I think is one of the encouraging things about the game Monday night is that the Giants are 5-3, but they just don't seem like a 5-3 team. And some of the things you kind of mentioned, they've given up more passing yards than they've produced. They've given up like almost 40% more rushing yards. They only average barely over 3 yards a carry. They have a -7 turnover margin. They've given up more points than they've scored. They just, you look at this, the roster and like, well, how in the heck? And even, their best players like Odell Beckham, barely catching half his passes and seems to be getting more attention for proposing to kicking nets than actually catching balls. And so you kind of look at that and like, well, how, they really don't seem like a 5-3 team. And now, the Bengals have shown they can win in New York, I guess, early in the year, although it turned out the Jets ended up being not a very good team. So I would say from that perspective, I'm not too worried because I don't see it the same way as a primetime game when they're playing, a 8-0 team or a 6-2 team, a team that really you're watching like, wow, now this is a really good team. I think it's a game they can win. And I know a lot of people will also bring up the other point you mentioned about the Bengals' success or lack of success after bye weeks. And that's another thing. We had a poll on our on the Cincy Jungle website last week that we had over 300 fans take, and I just wanted to mention that briefly. If you haven't taken it, it's still on there. Feel free to. It's basically going back to the year 2000, looking at how the team's done. Guess if they won or lost each of the matchups. Kind of gives you the record, the opponent, or whatever, the situation, and then see how well you remember. Anyway, interesting thing. Since 2000, they're like 5-10-1 after a bye, which is pretty bad because you would think, well, you've got an extra week to prepare, so something's not going right.
It's awful.
Yeah. And granted, some of that is, before the Carson Palmer, before Marvin Lewis, when, the end of that lost night, that decade in the 90s where, you're losing every week. It doesn't really matter if you have a bye week or not.
Right.
Since Lewis has been there, they're 5-7-1. Although over the last 8 years, they're actually 4-3-1. So there does seem, and of course, part of that is, they've over the last 8 years, they've been to the playoffs 5 or 6 times. So it does kind of seem to go a little well with, okay, the teams are getting better. Their record after the bye is getting better. So I'm not too worried about the bye. And in theory, they've had 16 days or something. So if you can't game plan for a team, that doesn't look that good after 16 days, there's just a lot of problems going on. So I'm hoping it's a game they win. It's a game they should win. It'll be very interesting to see, what happens if they come out flat, if they look bad. I wasn't too impressed with them against the Redskins. They looked like a team that should have lost. So I just want to see, okay, you've had a couple weeks, you've had a chance to regroup, you've come back home, you've rested, you did your vacations, you took your kids trick-or-treating, all that good stuff, you voted, you did all that. Let's see if you look like a playoff team.
Yeah, and this week, again, I mentioned earlier in the show, this week looked like a week not only to regroup, but a lot of the players were kind of unplugging a little bit from football. Looks like they took some little vacations and did a lot of family time, maybe went back to their alma mater to watch some games. All of that kind of took place. And aside from that, it looks like the coaching staff was very heavy, doing a lot of heavy work because they were bringing in guys for workouts and all that. So hopefully that combination really brings in a nice mix as the Bengals come off the bye and go to this game. Connor, I mentioned I believe I mentioned the records here and who they lost to. The Giants in week 1 beat the Cowboys by a point. They beat the Saints, who aren't a very strong team, by 3 points at home. They beat the Ravens, who have also been a Jekyll and Hyde team, by 4 points. They beat the Rams by 7 points, who the Rams have really been sliding recently, and then they just beat the Eagles by 5 points, and the Eagles are a pretty solid team. But I'm kind of confused by their resume a bit, and so I kind of want to get your thoughts on that, as well as what should be the mindset this week of this team. Is it desperation mode, or is it, let's relax, let's play our game, we got this? Because there's 2 different approaches, obviously. If you kind of go, and there's positive and negatives to both. So what are your thoughts on both of those areas, both the Giants, the wins they have, and their overall schedule, as well as what the approach and mindset should be by the Bengals this week?
Yeah, so you look at the Giants and their wins, like you said, week 1 at Dallas, which, the Cowboys have a great record. I don't think things were clicking for them right away at the beginning of the season, and so you chalk that up to, okay, maybe they just had a good game. They won by 1 point, as a little luck. Week 2 at home against New Orleans, the Saints are a different team on the road than they are at home. They're great at home. They're not great on the road. They play like they play dome ball. So when they're in the dome, they're better. But we're in the dome that game. They beat Baltimore, who is not a good team with not a good quarterback. They beat LA, not a good team, not a good quarterback. And they beat Philly, who, despite a great start, has really come back down to earth. And I want to mention in that Philly game in particular, because the offense per Pro Football References expected points formula, which is kind of, if you have a positive score, it's a good game. Above 10, it's like a really good game. Negative, obviously a bad game. Negative below 10 is obviously a really bad game. And so for offense, that game, so the Giants had an amazing game on defense. Their expected points on defense was like 47.29. But their offense was at -20 and their special teams was at -19. So basically, essentially that just means their defense played amazing against a team with really no quality running backs. Despite how well he's been playing, Carson Wentz, who is still a rookie quarterback with not a lot of receiving options and an offensive line that really can't hold up. So they had an amazing performance, yet despite all of that, they won by 5 points at home, a bye week. So I don't know. I don't think the Giants have a quality win yet. And despite the fact that they've been playing, they forced 6 turnovers in the past 2 games. But you look at them, and on offense, they've turned the ball over in every single game of the entire season. They've turned the ball over multiple times in 5 of their 8 games, which is pretty insane, including 3 games with at least 3 turnovers. Actually, 3 games with exactly 3. So, and that's against the Saints defense, the Redskins defense, and the Ravens defense. Only the Ravens defense of those 3 is really a above average defense, I would even say. And so the Giants haven't really played that tough of a schedule. The Bengals are a better team, I think, than the record shows. They're coming off a bye. They still have a pretty decent record. To me, it's definitely not desperation time for the Bengals. And I think Scott made a good point. The Bengals have played a lot of very good teams in primetime. That's why every memorable primetime win happens to be a huge memorable game because, it's against the Broncos or, they barely lost to the Cardinals last year in primetime. Like every single very good team they end up playing happens to be in primetime. Last year they weren't supposed to play the Cardinals in primetime, but it got flexed to primetime because the Cardinals started playing well. So, I don't really think I'm not a believer in the primetime curse or whatever people want to call it. The Bengals have beaten the Browns, and even though it's not a national game, it's still a primetime game in my eyes. Like I said, I don't think the Giants are a great team. They have the worst running game in the entire NFL, and despite the fact they have Odell, they have a very inconsistent receiver group, to say the least. Even Odell has been incredibly inconsistent this year.
Yeah, I've got him on my fantasy team, so I know that well. Yes.
Yeah, and Scott does too. Who, by the way, Scott, don't tell me I didn't tell you so. I was going to win this week. 4-game win streak now.
I'm still in first, so that's okay.
I know you're way ahead of everyone, but yeah, pretty good game by me. But anyways, the Giants, inconsistent team, very bad running game. They have a very bad defense. Their defense has scored positively in terms of Pro Football References expected points in all of 3 games this year, and they're coming off back-to-back good games. But with the whole measuring the Bengals' success against the Browns and the Dolphins early in the year, do we think that the Giants' success is just success, or do we think, okay, well, it has to be sort of relative to the competition? So they're definitely a mysterious team because they have potential to be a good team. They're a team with they have a team with one above average player on their entire offense, and on defense they have a couple of nice free agent acquisitions who have been inconsistent but pretty good at times. How many difference makers do the Giants really have as a team? I think Odell Beckham, maybe Jason Pierre-Paul, maybe Damon Harrison, maybe Olivier Vernon. So that's at most 4, where the Bengals have several more than that. So I think the Bengals should win this game despite the whole primetime thing, despite Odell Beckham, whatever it is. You can key in on the passing game because they're not going to run on you. And if they do run on the Bengals shouldn't be a playoff team. So that's just my take, I guess.
Good stuff there, Connor, especially with the statistics there. And I think some of those high volume those games of high volume turnovers and things of that nature, that is Eli Manning in a nutshell. He's quite a bit of a feast or famine type of guy. Now, obviously, not all of those turnovers are specifically on him, but we've seen that from him. He's had the 4 interception games, but he's also had the 5 touchdown games and things like that. So, that's one thing to think about. Real quickly before we move on to our next segment, I want to ask you, Scott. I'll start with you. Your one key and why. Your one key to a Bengals win and what they should do and why this week.
I'm just going to say defense. I'm going to make it very broad, just because as good as they've been, and especially last year. When Gunther took over, I know a lot of people were thinking, okay, Zimmer's going, they won't be as good. They had 2 really good years, and then all of a sudden this year at the same cast, they just are struggling. Burfict doesn't seem the same. Atkins is still getting pressures, but doesn't seem to have the numbers. Dunlap doesn't seem to be in the backfield as often, although he is still kind of there. I think they just aren't operating on all cylinders. And as we've kind of talked about with the Giants, they do have an offense that can score points. They don't really have a running back, but with Beckham and with the rookie Sterling Sharp and Manning can heave the ball, that's something that busted coverage, something goes wrong, they screw something up, that they make Sean Williams have to cover a receiver or something crazy like that, and next thing you could be giving up touchdowns. And so especially if we can't get pressure. I mean, last week it seemed like we were barely getting to I guess 2 weeks ago, we just don't seem to be hitting the quarterback enough.
Terrible.
So I'd say that's the one thing I want to see.
I mean, Marshall Newhouse might play.
And that's the thing I want to see is, we've faced some other lines that, we should have been more dominant against. So that's the thing I want to see is, does this defense look like the Bengals defense? Do they get pressure? Are they, getting to the ball? Are they, making plays? Are they going to keep this game where, we're not down and we're forced to throw a lot? Can we keep it a close game? Can we keep it defensively? Can we turn the ball over? Can we force some 3-and-outs? Can we give the offense a chance to mix up the run and the pass, kind of play the lead, keep the lead? So that's the thing that I want to see. Well, I want to see a win, but
yeah, I think everybody wants to see that. Yeah. But yeah, I agree with you there. And as Connor mentioned, it does seem like Marshall Newhouse, the guy who struggled mightily when he was with the Bengals in relief of, I believe it was Andre Smith when he came in for the Bengals at times at right tackle. He is actually a starter for the Giants and has been. So, that's a guy the Bengals could take advantage of. And it also sounds like Justin Pugh, their very good left guard, might not play this week. At least
he's not playing.
He's the
best and their most versatile lineman.
Yeah, so that's a big loss for them, and that he also would probably be one of the guys tasked to go up against a guy like Geno Atkins, and obviously the new addition Gilberry as he comes and probably kicks inside on passing downs. Connor, your one big key to a Bengals victory and why on Monday night against the Giants?
Forced turnovers. I mean, this, like I said, this is kind of alluded to it. This is a team that turns the ball over more frequently than probably any team in the NFL. And so you have a defense that's been struggling as of late, not being able to convert those pressures into sacks or even hits for that matter. Dunlap and Atkins aren't at that same rate that they were last year. You're facing probably the worst offensive line you'll face on your schedule, except maybe the Browns if Joe Thomas got hurt after, before their next game. But yeah, it's the worst line they're going to face, and you have center Weston Richburg is probably the only average or better player on their entire offensive line, and you have a defensive line that should win that matchup. You have linebackers who which running back are they going to have to cover? Rashad Jennings is probably their best running back. Their best, they don't have a tight end that's capable enough of earning the starting role because Will Tye and Larry Donnell are switching off back and forth. I mean, this is a team with, okay, Sterling Shepard's made a couple of plays, but he's still a rookie, probably at that same level as Tyler Boyd, who's just making plays because they don't have any other receivers behind Odell Beckham. That's why Victor Cruz is still on the field, even though he's not the impact player he once was. So, I mean, rookie Roger Lewis caught a touchdown. It was like a 6th, 7th, or maybe even undrafted guy this past week. And, I mean, credit to the Giants offense last week. They played well, and they took advantage of a Philly defense and made them look really bad, even though Philadelphia's had one of the better defenses in the NFL. But this is a defense that, despite the struggles it's had, is still, I mean, Drake Kirkpatrick has been up and down, but he hasn't given up he hasn't been very susceptible to the deep ball. And Adam Jones, despite his struggles, is still more than capable of, taking on whoever he's going to face. The safeties, really all they have to do is prevent the deep ball, because the run isn't probably going to be that big of an issue for them. And if it is, then, you to work on that run game. And so the linebackers, I mean, the only thing that scares me about the Giants offense is if they send Odell Beckham out on short and intermediate routes, which that's another thing is the Giants offense hasn't been very creative. If you put Odell Beckham in motion, he becomes an Antonio Brown caliber player who is a type of weapon who can be used in so many different ways and all these different wrinkles that you can surprise defenses with. But the Giants offense hasn't really been doing that. And so that was interesting to me when I was watching some tape and reading what Andy Benoit, who's kind of my go-to guy on tape analysis, had to say this week. And so yeah, forced turnovers, and I guess on offense too, just keep running the ball. The Giants' defensive line is good. They have Damon Harrison, who's definitely a quality run stuffer, but this is a week where the line should be able again to get back to where it was losing Andre Smith, I guess, slash we saw those moments in the Browns game and even some in the Washington game. The line was definitely showing some great consistency and strengths. So I'd like to see that continue on into Sunday. Frankly, this Giants are 5-3, but are they really that good of a team? I'm not buying it. I mean, I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Mine, I'm going to go kind of the route Scott went, and I'm going to go a little bit broad with mine. And they got to get some sort of a big play, whether it's an interception return for a touchdown, a big kickoff or punt return, a long ball to AJ Green. They got to get something, and hopefully early, because one of the things that you've seen with this team that you didn't see this year was, if the offense is struggling, maybe the defense isn't playing up to par. Well, guess what? Adam Jones is back there, and he'll pop a big punt return and get him into field position, and all of a sudden, look what happens. The Bengals win the game. That's not happening this year, and it's not just Adam Jones or Alex Erickson. I mean, it's Vontez Burfict isn't making his impact plays we've seen over the years. Geno Atkins is playing pretty solid football, but not to the level that he played last year. There's not a lot of turnovers, so I just want to see those real big wow impact plays. AJ Green has really been the guy who has been the big play guy this year for the Bengals and largely throughout his career. But I think they need something somewhere else, maybe something even unlikely, a fumble recovery return, like I said, a special teams return, something where they can say, you know what, here we go. We've studied, we've done some things over the bye, we've done some things, and now this is a play that we've seen us make over the years, and now we can kind of hang our hats on this. And if you get up on this Giants team early, I think that's going to be key. It looks like we're getting a couple of different fan questions coming in here, so that's good news. We'll get to that segment in just a minute. But what are your keys to victory this week, OBI listeners? Is it one of the things we said? Is it something else that we missed? Let us know, and you can hit us up on Twitter at BengalsOBI. Myself, Anthony Cosenza, is on Twitter at CJAnthonyCUI. Connor Howe is on Twitter at HowNFL. We're trying to get Scott Schultze there on Twitter, but he's being resistant. But you can hit it
Facebook.
There you go.
There you go.
Eventually I'll get MySpace.
There you go. Yeah, MySpace. There you go. I love it. You can also hit us up on via email, the obinsider@gmail.com. You can download this show, leave a rating and comments on iTunes. You can check us out on YouTube. We actually have some live viewers tonight that are checking out the live stream and feeding us some questions and whatnot. So check us out both live and or subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our stuff there. You can also subscribe to our SoundCloud account and get all of our content there as well. And obviously, this show is presented by Cincy Jungle, and we post this podcast on the site weekly, as well as some of our segments. So check those out, as well as the other content on Cincy Jungle. And we appreciate the support that you've shown this show over the past couple of months. It's been a lot of fun. Speaking of the past couple of months, we have not done this segment for a little while here, and it's the Hater of the Week. There have been a number of different high-profile people that have made this list. Colin Cowherd's been one. Frank Schwab from Yahoo Sports has been another. There's been a number of people who have made our prestigious Hater of the Week list, and we have a very high-profile person that makes it again this week, not only for some comments he made back in October after the Bengals lost to the Cowboys and lost in a very uninspiring manner, but he, about a week ago, Stephen A. Smith of ESPN, who is, I'm sure, missing his best friend Skip Bayless, who has since moved on to Fox Sports. He again,
Undisputed, one of the greatest shows of all time.
Oh yeah. There's no way I'm watching that. Anyway, Stephen A. Smith had some very coarse words for the Bengals, saying that the team embarrassed the NFL in London. Again, Stephen A. Smith, for a long time, if you've paid attention to First Take and all of that, he's actually been a Marvin Lewis supporter. But now basically since the team lost that wild card game against the Steelers up until and through this year, he has been all over Marvin Lewis. And Scott, I'll start with you. Let me read you a quote here. And this again was from about a week ago. Marvin Lewis needs to go. I'm not a fan of Marvin Lewis and the job he's done in Cincinnati. Well, if you read back to Stephen A. Smith's, if you listen to some of the stuff, that's not what he said over the years. That's okay. He's been there for 12 complete years. I think he's in his 13th or 14th year. They still have not won a playoff game, and it looks like it's going to be another year that they fail to do it. I think I won't go through the whole thing, but I think that the citizens of Cincinnati deserve better. All of that. So aside from him getting our prestigious award from being the hater of the week, Scott, what do you make of his comments? Do you agree with him? Do you kind of say it's Stephen A. Smith? He likes to make headlines. Is it a little bit of both?
I'm going to take a very odd approach, and I'm going to say this kind of reminds me of vanilla ice cream.
Okay.
So you guys are in Southern California, so I'm sure you guys have had some hot summer days.
Yeah, it was 97 today.
Or hot fall days.
Yeah, it's ridiculous today, by the way. Yeah.
So, it's hot outside, and you have like those beads of sweat kind of coming down, and you see someone with like a big soft serve vanilla ice cream cone. That would be pretty good. Like, wow, that'd be pretty nice. It's nicer than I have now. I just have sweat, and I'm hot, and so you see that, and that's pretty cool. You get that vanilla ice cream cone, you start eating it. It's like, yeah, this is good. I like this. And then you see the guy walk by with the Dairy Queen Blizzard. So it's not just vanilla. It's got chocolate. It's got Oreos in there. It's got all this other stuff kind of swirled up. This big tall cup. Like, man.
You need to stop talking. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, I haven't had dinner yet. So
that's what that would be awesome. That's what I'd really like. Well, the Bengals kind of have that with Marvin Lewis. Before he came, we didn't even have vanilla. We didn't even have an empty cone. We had, I don't know what we had. We had like the little push popsicle that was melted, but it wasn't even that. It was
you had a used Baskin Robbins spoon that you found out of a dumpster. Is probably
we had a little pink spoon with maybe like a tiny bit of chocolate syrup on it.
Yes, exactly.
And that was all we had for like a decade. So that vanilla ice cream cone was pretty nice. I mean, it was kind of like, wow, we get ice cream, and not only ice cream, we get a sugar cone and ice cream. This is pretty hard to beat, and that's kind of what you had in Cincinnati. So for him, kind of saying the job he's done in Cincinnati, I don't think Stephen A. Smith's really looking at I think he's looking at the most recent years, the failures, the fact they haven't won a playoff game, and they've had some miserable, especially the last playoff game. Yeah, they should be better. They should do better. But looking at what he's done, he's been, it's kind of the curse of being good, not great, but he rebuilt a roster that was a total mess, a franchise that was even a bigger mess. He's kind of under limited constraints where they're not going to spend in free agency. So you have to do a lot with kind of one hand tied behind your back, and it took a while to change and get that change. And so to get from where they were to where they have been over the last 4 or 5 years, I think it's very hard for someone outside of Bengaldom to really recognize that and see, what was he able to do. So it's hard to say you're not. To me, it's kind of ridiculous to say you're not a fan of him or what he's done, because to make that change, to get you from that little pink spoon to that ice cream cone, that was pretty nice. The problem is, we're a dozen years in, and we still have the ice cream cone. And we see all these people walking by with these nice, big blizzards and different things, or, they're frozen custard, or out in California, I don't know what it is, maybe gelato or something fancy.
Froyo.
Yeah. So, and we still have our ice cream cone, our vanilla ice cream cone. Like, it's like 1940s, you get one flavor. And I think at some point, you want more. And I think he's had enough to do more. I mean, we've had good players. We've had, supposedly had good drafts. They've had a good core there. We we should be. I think we should be doing better than we are. And so in that regard, yeah, the sentiment is there. I think obviously, being who Stephen Smith is, yeah, he's kind of being a bit exaggerating, going a bit overboard, kind of throwing him under the bus. Oh, this is so horrible. You whatever. And then you get the second part of his comment, which kind of drives me crazy, but for a totally different reason, where he says, I think the media needs to do its job and call this man out. And it kind of raises the question, well, what is the job of the media? Is it to report the news, or is it to create the news? And it's one thing to say, here's what he's done, here's what he hasn't done, but it seems like he wants to take it a little further and kind of impose his will on Bengals and Bengals fans. And I think it's up to Bengals fans. I think
what Steve to do. Last year he said that he was like Kevin Durant. You don't want to make an enemy out of me. I mean, the guy thinks that his job is to call people out.
And I think, and I would kind of, I've never been a fan of his, so I would kind of, I'd probably take anything he says a little slower. But I think it's hard to just outright dismiss everything Lewis did to get us to the point we've been at. But yeah, at some point, okay, you got us there, but you've got to get us a little further. You got us that ice cream cone, but at some point, at least give us we want a taste of that blizzard. I mean, those look pretty good, especially the chocolate one with the Reese peanut butter cups. That I'd like. So I guess that's my take.
I like it, and I've actually not had a blizzard for a long time, truth be told, but I've always liked them. And I'm not a sweets guy really, but especially with what we said with the weather where it is in Southern California right now, that might be something I need to hit up tonight. So I appreciate that, Scott. Now, Connor, the rest of that second quote, and Scott touched on it a little bit. I think the media needs to do its job better by calling this man out instead of worrying what the hell I'm saying about him, which they've tended to do. Well, I mean, I guess we're playing right into that. Why don't you call him out for what he's not doing, which is winning football games when it counts? So here's my thing. I don't necessarily like Stephen A. Smith, and he's kind of one of those blowhard guys that says things to say things and get headlines, and maybe he's one of the guys viewing us on YouTube tonight because he knew we were going to talk about him. We don't know, but that last sentence,
I wouldn't be surprised.
I know. I mean, we're worldwide. What struck me is, why don't you call him out for what he's not doing, which is winning football games when it counts? And that's the reality. Whether you agree with Stephen A. Smith, you like him or whatever, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you find validity in it, even if it's coming from a talking head like Stephen A. Smith?
I mean, come on, guys. This is supposed to be the Hater of the Week section. Let's hate on Stephen A. Smith, and I will start. Okay, Stephen A. Smith's argument for why the Bengals should be ashamed of the way they played in London. Okay, let me just be straightforward and say that I try as hard as I can to read or watch everything that's posted on Cincy Jungle, whether it's an article, a comment, even a video that's posted on one of the articles. And so I literally never watch Stephen A. Smith videos, but I was like, okay, I'm just gonna watch it and we'll see what happens. And so I watch it for probably less than a minute, and his first argument is, they play soccer in England, and there were so many missed kicks. That's a shame by Americans that they can't even kick the ball. How are you supposed to get British people to like football when they can't even kick it? And I was just thinking to myself, who's this guy's audience? I mean, really, who's this guy's audience that people actually believe that the fact that a guy is missing a field goal is setting a bad name for football as a sport in the UK? It was beyond me. And Stephen A. Smith, we all just touched on, is a guy who says outrageous things because that's the way he makes money. And I've very strongly considered making a career out of saying outrageous things, just because, I mean, why not? If I'm going to get paid to say outrageous things and I can take a backlash, I mean, why not? Because that'd be a pretty cool job. Look at Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith. They're two of the highest paid journalists in the field. And they think that
Journalist is used.
calling people out.
Journalist is used a little lightly there, I think, right?
Exactly. I mean, Stephen A. Smith will threaten people on TV as like a joke, but it's still threatening people about the fact that Kevin Durant doesn't call him and break the news that he's going to Golden State or whatever it might be. This is just a guy who doesn't even deserve to be mentioned on this show. And okay, if we're talking about Marvin Lewis, the reason why Stephen A. Smith, whether he wants to admit it or not, has supported Marvin Lewis hasn't even been because the coach has been successful. It's because Marvin Lewis is one of the most successful black coaches of all time. And so for Stephen A. Smith, as a person of color, it makes sense. I don't want to turn this into a race thing, but it makes sense for him to align with a coach of color who has had tremendous success in the NFL. Whether it's, I mean, he hasn't won a Super Bowl, but he's turned around a franchise to the point where I think Hugh Jackson went to Cleveland because he wanted to have an effect on Cleveland like Marvin Lewis had on Cincinnati. Whether or not he's going to get to that point remains to be seen, but I think Marvin Lewis was a revolutionary in Cincinnati, and he turned the city and the franchise around. And so Stephen A. Smith is obviously going to team up with him when he's doing well and then abandon him when he's not doing well because that's what gets the clicks. But ultimately, it's I just think it's dumb. Why are we even talking about this? Stephen A. Smith is every single week he's going to go on about Marvin Lewis, and then if the Bengals start winning games, he's going to say, "Oh, I thought I was with the Bengals all along. They've always had a soft spot in my heart. Us, black guys got to stand up for ourselves," type of thing. It's just that's who he is, and he's a hater. He's a hater. All he does he gets paid to literally hate people, and so.
And you asked the question, why are we talking about it? Because he's hating on the Bengals, and that's this segment.
Yeah, no, I mean I understand.
But yeah, you don't want to sensationalize some of these things. Yeah. My thing with it is, I don't necessarily disagree with some of the things he said, particularly that last sentence, which is about winning football games when it counts. That's been Lewis's big bugaboo as the head coach of the Bengals. The sentence, I'm not a fan of Marvin Lewis and the job he's done in Cincinnati. If you are using that as an all-encompassing comment as to what he has done with the Cincinnati Bengals since 2003, that's just an ignorant comment. Obviously, you're not thinking outside of the box and looking at the big picture. You're thinking about January of 2016 up until this point, and not necessarily the entire thing. Because a lot of people, yes, the Bengals lose on primetime. Yes, they lose in inexplicable ways in front of the national audience, but this team was never given the opportunity to play in front of a national audience on Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football in previous years before Marvin Lewis, because they were so terrible. And they were not a competitive team, and they were not a good team to watch. They were not a playoff team. So I think from that sense, that is just not a smart statement by Stephen A. Smith. And the other thing that I look at is, you know what? Every time we've and it's kind of a same thing with Mike Nugent and all these other guys on the Bengals, that every time these guys struggle and you count them out, all of a sudden they do something where they restore the faith. And that's probably why you keep seeing Marvin Lewis getting these deals from Mike Brown, because even when things look bleak, he tends to kind of, whether it's a late season surge and they still miss the playoffs, or these 2014 when they had all kinds of injuries and you're like, how is this team still winning games and getting into the playoffs? They still find a way to make it happen more often than not under Marvin Lewis. I do think that if this team misses the playoffs and or this season does start spiraling out of control, I do think that then there's more validity about change being made with Marvin Lewis. But for now, we're midway through the season, and calling a tie in London an embarrassment to NFL fans is just an over-exaggeration of epic proportions. So, Stephen A. Smith of ESPN, congratulations. You have made the Orange and Black Insiders Hater of the Week, and we'll probably be sending you something in the mail. We don't know what yet, but look for it. It'll be something nice. Before we get out of here, let's end on a couple of fan questions. We did receive some, and one is a bit more X's and O's related, and another is a bit more a social issue and a potential long-term type of effect that's going to happen on the NFL. Let's start with one from Alex Peterman, who has been a Cincy Jungle friend for quite some time. He asks, for my part, I tend to wonder about Bengals zone coverage under Gunther. Too easy to find holes, obviously pointing to tight ends running amok the past handful of weeks. And, Connor, you had mentioned some things with crossing routes with Odell Beckham Scott. Your thoughts on that? Is overall athleticism and speed the issue?
I think for me, the biggest thing is Sean Williams versus Reggie Nelson, because of what it did to the secondary. And just watching Sean Williams as a starter this year and watching him as a backup before this year, he just isn't really much of a coverage guy. And whenever he seems to be in coverage, there just seems to be issues where he's either in the wrong spot or it just seems to be a liability back there. And I think with Reggie Nelson, you didn't have that because he was a very good coverage guy. So that let George Iloka be kind of like your secondary one, more of your guy you're going to play up close. Well, now that Nelson's gone, you kind of shift everyone back. So Iloka now has to be the guy who's more responsible for coverage, which isn't really his. He's good at it. He's not, Pro Bowl caliber. I mean, I think Nelson was better, and then now Sean Williams is getting the starting role, and so I think you just have that drop in what you're getting for your safeties, and especially Sean Williams. So if he's watching, just like Stephen A. Smith, I hope he doesn't get. I'm not trying to call him out. It'd be hard to do. I can't do it, but from what I've seen, I just think that's the biggest issue of that. I just don't see the safeties playing as well as I'd like them to, and I don't know if it's losing all of our defensive secondary coaches or they just aren't as good or what it is. So I'll just leave it at that.
Connor, your assessment. I mean, I know this is, obviously this is a bit more of a technical type of question and more of a dive into the playbook kind of question. I don't know. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I got to talk with Andy Benoit of Sports Illustrated. I do a little bit of work for him, and he is very, very knowledgeable about film, much more than I ever will be, and he has a lot of film study. And one thing he points out about Gunther's scheme is that Gunther loves to, and I'm sure fans notice it, he loves to run those double A gap blitzes, so he'll put his linebackers up on the line between the defensive tackles, and he'll kind of have 6 guys on the line. And when you do that, it's worked very successfully for the Bengals in terms of like getting blitzes to the quarterback. I mean, even if they don't result in a sack, the quarterback, he is always under pressure immediately. It's never one of those plays where the blitz doesn't come in quick enough. And so, but in order to run those successfully, you need a linebacker who can retreat back into coverage quick enough. And I think I touched on this last week, so I'll keep it brief in that regard. I mean, it's just you don't have guys who are able to do that. Ray Maluga's not quick enough. Vincent Ray, although he's been grading out well on metrics sites, isn't still quick enough to be able to be that kind of player. Vontaze Burfict still even isn't really that quick. And Burfict is good enough where he can kind of make up for that in coverage, and I think the whole rumors of him, gaining a ton of weight are a little bit misguided. I mean, maybe he is a little heavier. I'm sure it's part of the Bengals regimen and what they want him to do. So that slide, and especially now that he's playing a lot more middle linebacker, it probably makes sense that he's put on some weight because that's just how the Bengals play their middle linebackers. I mean, Ray Maluga has been one of those heavier set guys. I just want to address what Scott said about the safeties because I don't really want to say that you're wrong or anything like that. I just think it's kind of a common misconception with Bengal fans that, they play a lot of 1 high safety looks, and they really play a lot of 2 high safeties where basically Iloka and Williams are on one side of the field each. And I'm not going to pretend that I know exactly like the whole schematics of all of that, but essentially from what I've read that Andy Benoit has written, and from what I've seen on tape, the Bengals definitely play a lot of 2 high, like more than almost any other team in the NFL. And Carolina did the same thing last year, and we all know the whole Josh Norman left thing, and the reason why they let him go was because they didn't really believe that they needed very good corners as long as they had an effective pass rush, and they didn't even really need good safeties in that regard. All they needed was an effective pass rush, and then since they had Thomas Davis and Luke Kuechly, 2 of the quickest and best coverage linebackers in the NFL, you just plug and play, and it makes sense because you're getting the pass rush there. Teams don't have a lot of time to throw. Kuechly and Davis are covering the intermediate routes, and there you go. In the Bengals part, they don't run a similar scheme in that standpoint of, like I said, they run a lot of they put their linebackers on the line a lot, and so you need quicker linebackers, and it really messes up in man coverage. I think that's really what has been an issue for them is when you have a guy like Carlos Dansby or Vincent Ray lined up in man coverage, on the outside against Gronk or against a running back, and they just aren't quick enough to catch up, and so you got to figure out something to do. And I know fans don't really like the whole sending out Michael Johnson in coverage, and I don't think he should be in intermediate coverage, but put him in coverage on the flat or something where you're going to be able to prevent the running back. I think Carlos Dunlap has made so many plays this year where he's jumped up and batted balls down that would have been big gains to a running back if not for him standing up and jumping and batting a ball down, and that's covered up a lot of the bad play from the linebackers. And so you either need Michael Johnson to start making plays on one side and bat the balls down on those screen passes, or just even those throws to the flat. And you need your linebackers to start playing. And Gunther he runs a vanilla scheme. And that's not, I don't think that's a bad thing because it worked last year. He trusts his players to execute. He just, at this point of the year, the players aren't executing at the point that they were last year, or the level I should say that they were last year. And so if you're Gunther, I say you let it run for a few more weeks and see where things are. And because you don't want it in the middle of the season. So not that he just can't change one play individually, but just that you can't just overhaul everything that you've done. And so I say if you're Gunther, you play out what you've been doing for a few more weeks. You hope the players eventually begin to execute. Maybe, adding Wallace Gilberry or giving other corners a shot is going to change a couple of things. And you hope that, things click. And if not, then you kind of understand, we need different personnel. And if I'm Paul Gunther, I'm so frustrated that there's still one linebacker who maybe could be a good coverage player, which we still don't know yet, and Nick Vigil on the roster. I mean, you need more athletic linebackers in today's day and age. And I don't know, I'm sure Gunther has some say in who's drafted, but it would definitely be frustrating to inherit a roster where you don't have athletic linebackers in a defensive scheme that is predicated on athletic linebackers making plays.
So I'll kind of be brief and piggyback a little bit on what Connor said there. I think team speed overall is the issue with this, and you look at their defense. Who are their fast guys on defense, especially in the secondary? Aloka can gain ground and move. He's not necessarily a burner. He's a guy that's physical and can make some plays. Sean Williams, again, more of a run stopper than a pass coverage type of guy and not necessarily a burner. Adam Jones, he's always been a fast guy, but he's more shifty than fast, especially when he's at 33, 34 years old. Dre Kirkpatrick is probably one of your fastest starters, if not the fastest starter that you have on the defense.
Probably the only secondary member that has above average speed for his position.
Right. And so you look at the linebackers the Bengals employ, whether they rotate in and out, Vinny Ray, Carlos Dansby, Ray Malaluga, whoever they bring in there. None of those guys are burners or supreme athletes either. So I think I think they just need to invest in more team speed instead of maybe these big guys, more of the veteran savviness. They need more athletes, more guys that can make some plays and move laterally well. That's what I think. So thanks for the question there, Alex. We've got another here coming up. It's about, and this is a little sticky situation, and I guess I say that tongue in cheek if you if you know where I'm going with this. But a second state, again, not to dive deeply into politics, but a second state in the United States, in California, has voted to legalize the recreational use of marijuana. And you now have, 4 teams in that state alone. You have a team in Colorado, in the Denver Broncos, that also is in the second state that has legalized marijuana for recreational use. So
Washington too.
Yeah, Washington did as well. Excuse me. Yeah, so there's 3 states now. So you have a couple of.
Oh, it already was in Washington.
Yeah,
Seattle's there.
So you've got six teams, and you can tell by me not really thinking about Washington on the top of my mind. I'm a little ignorant on this subject. However, this subject does have implications for the NFL, and not only the nation, but the NFL. Scott and Connor, I know you've got an article you probably want to reference, but I'm going to start with Scott here. What do you think the ramifications are about this passing, and do you think more players will now be lobbying for this to be something that they don't need to be tested for, nor should they be suspended for?
Yeah, I think it definitely is going to be a big issue with the testing, because you get to a point where it's a team or a league rule where they say you can't do it, but the state says you legally can in that state. So it's going to, I assume it'll get to a point where they have lawyers involved in the probably in the next CBA. It'll get brought up as far as, hey, it's legal to do where I live or where I play, but not where. And it kind of brings up the question of, okay, well, now you have these dilemmas where, let's say a guy played for the Rams, so it was legal and he was using it, and then he gets cut and signed by the Browns. And now all of a sudden it's, in his state, it's illegal and he has it in the system. Are you able to test him for it? Because, or let's say a guy lives in like Los Banos, California. So, it's legal where he lives, but he doesn't play for a team in California. Let's say he plays for the Bengals or I don't know, another team like the Ravens or something. So you get in these really sticky situations where, hey, for part of the year, it was perfectly legal for me, even though the league said it wasn't. So I have to assume this is something that will definitely come up in the CBA. It'll definitely get a lot of work lawyers involved. And you'll probably see that too, not just in the NFL, but probably in the workplace in some of those areas, because a lot of employers have, I'm sure if you go work at Taco Bell, they probably have in the application, no drugs or drug-free. We drug test you. I know some factories will do that because they don't want people showing up operating, forklifts, while they're high or whatever. And so I know it's going to be a sticking point, because now the states are saying these things are legal. How can an employer turn around and say, well, yeah, it's legal, but we still want to ask you not to do that? And so it kind of brings up the question of, okay, at what point can a company or a league, have a rule to do or not do one thing when the state says, yeah, it's perfectly fine to do it. So it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays out, especially as more states are going that way. I would have to assume the league, especially based on Goodell's track record, that they're probably still going to be really hard with it, because they kind of have a past with, hey, we've kind of given this hard sentence. We don't want to start loosening it up now, because as soon as we do, we're going to open the floodgates. They tend to take more of a hardline approach. So I would assume until something changes more than a few states passing it, they're probably still going to be just as harsh on the suspensions and fines and whatever they levy, until something comes more either through the CBA or through lawsuits or something like that to change it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, and part of the reason, and I'm not going to get into it, but part of the reason as a Californian I voted the way I did is there are some financial, potential benefits for the state and all that kind of stuff, but there's also a very big slippery slope that comes with that, and what that means not only for across the country, but for businesses and all kinds of things. So Connor, you had an article you found from the NFLPA that you maybe wanted to reference in answering this question.
Yeah. So it's on NFL.com, actually, written by Jeremy Bergman. It's pretty brief, but now, according to this article, a total of 29 states will now permit cannabis for medical reasons in 8 states, like we know, with DC and California and Washington permit recreational use. And so among those also states that, along with California, were Massachusetts and at least 3 more approved medical marijuana use, with Florida being the big one of those 3 that has an NFL team. And so the reason why players in the NFL are lobbying for marijuana is because we all know is the whole player safety with concussions and treatment of, it's just players are taking pills left and right for any sort of injury. Go watch any sort of football TV show and they'll see even high schoolers taking, prescription pain medication for injuries. And so you see guys like Eugene Monroe, former left tackle on the Ravens, lobbying for medical marijuana usage in the NFL. and now it's becoming legal. So is the NFL going to make a decision? And that's something where I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see. I personally, I even though marijuana is now recreationally legal or whatever, it's not my thing, and I don't have anything against people who do that. But I think for players in the NFL, if players want to make that decision, I think they should be able to make that decision, especially if it's legal within their own state. There's so many pain medications they're taking, OxyContin, Vicodin, whatever it might be. These are pretty seriously. These are pills that could have
They're
lethal
opiates. They're
implications.
opiates. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if someone says, take the can form, you want to consume it, or I don't even know if you consume it, just inhale it or take a pill, whatever it is. Um, I can't find any reason to say no to that. With the fact that it's not a medically like thing that treats anything, but neither are pain medications. It doesn't treat anything. It just lessens the pain along with dozens and dozens of side effects. Not that marijuana doesn't have side effects, but I don't think that it has any sort of side effects that include death, which is definitely a possibility with a lot of those pain medications. And so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. And as we know with the NFL, nothing really gets done in the NFL. It's a pretty hypocritical league that like we've touched on, that they say they care about things, but they a lot of times don't. So I wouldn't be surprised if this gets doesn't nothing ever happens with marijuana in the NFL for the rest of time. I could also see maybe things change, and maybe with all the low ratings or whatever, all this drama that Goodell legalizes marijuana in the NFL, and now everyone loves him because for whatever reason. So it'll be interesting to see. Definitely a lot of teams now. You have all the California teams. Florida has Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, maybe one other team, Miami. You have the Patriots now. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, and as with any drug or anything, there are side effects, and alcohol has its repercussions. Marijuana is some people can become addicted to it. I'm not going to get on my high horse and talk down about anything, but it can be an addictive substance. And it for a lot of people, they inhale smoke. That's not necessarily healthy for you. And there have been cases of THC poisoning in people and in kids in places like Colorado based on overconsumption of marijuana. And that's something that obviously, as you can get alcohol poisoning, you can obviously overdose on other drugs and things like that. So there are repercussions to marijuana as well, maybe not to the same extent as some other things, but it's something the NFL will probably need to start looking at, especially as more states potentially not only start allowing medical marijuana, but also legalizing it for recreational use, as California just did in this last election. So good question there. Real quick, we've got one more, and then we're going to get out of here. We're a little hard pressed for time, guys. But we definitely want to get to these fan questions that came our way. We did get one in our YouTube chat room. And what I want to hear from you is the player name and maybe a sentence or two as to why you went with that way. Scott, we have a question from Crazy Hunto. And it's, who's better, Gio or Hill?
I'm going to give the crazy answer and say Gio. And I'd like to go Hill because he has the bigger numbers, the bigger touchdowns. But the thing with Giovanni Bernard is that if I were to pick one, I'd pick him just because if I had one running back spot to fill, I think he's a lot more versatile. I think he's a very good pass catcher. He's very good in pass protection. When given the chance, he seems to be an effective runner, and he has shown in the past that he could do short yardage if he needed to, and he's not the big load, but he seems to do a good job of, all aspects of the running game. And he's also great in space. And for whatever reason, it just seems like they struggle to get him the ball in space. It just seems like whenever they do a swing pass or a screen pass, it just never seems to work. The defense is always kind of on it. But when they can get him in space, he's very special. And I'd like to see them try to do that more. And so I'd say, for all the reasons above, I would go with Giovanni Bernard.
Okay, Scott?
You mean Connor?
But
Connor, sorry, excuse me. Yeah.
Is it crazy to think that Giovanni Bernard is the most underrated player on the entire Bengals roster? I think that, I mean, Scott laid it out perfectly. He's a guy who the Bengals didn't draft him because they wanted a bell cow. Originally, they wanted a compliment to Ben Jarvis Greenell. So we all know how that went. But that being said, I'm still gonna go Jeremy Hill. He's my boy, but also he has the ceiling where you can see flashes of brilliance in him, and he's a very similar player. I wouldn't say in terms of like everything, but he reminds me of Melvin Gordon in the sense that the Chargers line wasn't blocking well for Melvin Gordon, and he had 0 touchdowns to show for it, and everyone made a huge deal out of it. And he wasn't running great, like obviously, but he wasn't running terribly. He was still a pretty elusive guy who could break a tackle or two, and I think he's a guy who requires an offensive line in front of him to block well, and obviously that gives you a certain ceiling as a player. You know, a guy like Adrian Peterson, who has an endless career despite not having a great line his entire career, is definitely a different player. But Jeremy Hill, I think, in the same sense, is a guy who, when the line can block, he's a guy who will make plays. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And like we saw in the Browns game, I mean, it hasn't been very recent, but even in the Redskins game, he pulled off a couple of nice runs. He's a guy where when the blocks go right, he is a top 10 running back in the NFL, let alone maybe higher. So I don't know. I think he's a great player. He's been showing a lot more diversity this year in terms of he's blocking better, and he's even being used in the passing game a lot more than he was, I believe. I mean, I don't have numbers to back that up, but it appears as though he's doing that. So I don't know. I just like Hill. He's a guy where I hope we'll be able to stay with the Bengals long term. I think he's the best running back on the roster, and I really like him as a guy too. He's a really likable player.
Interesting. So Scott went Gio, Connor went Hill. You kind of took a lot of the words out of my mouth there, Connor. I mean, Hill is a guy, when he is good, he is awesome. And he moves well for a big guy. I especially as a rookie, I likened his feet to a Jerome Bettis because he has such quick feet and can move well for his frame, and actually has better speed, obviously, than Bettis did. But I'm still going to go Gio, and I think it's just the multi-dimensions. And I really, and it's a close call for me. I'm still going to go Gio, though. The pass protection that I witnessed last week in London was unbelievable. And he is a guy that just seems, as you mentioned, Connor, he does more with less in terms of blocking, in terms of openings. He's patient. He can see things. And I think some things need to be created a bit more for Hill than they do for Giovanni Bernard. I do worry about the durability factor, especially as he's taken open field shots on passes and things of that nature. But by a nose, I will go with Giovanni Bernard, but the Bengals are lucky and fortunate to have both. And before
can't go wrong with either one.
No, and just in case you haven't really thought about it, Hill actually is back at 5 yards per carry this year, and is kind of actually getting back to some of those rookie-like numbers, and on pace for another 1,000-yard season, and is hitting the end zone pretty well. So,
of course, the 18 yards of carry didn't hurt.
That didn't hurt at all. That's right. that game really propelled him.
13th in the NFL in total rushing yards, and that's having a bye week. And I don't know how many running backs in front of him have not.
Yeah, and he's only got 100 plus carries. Yeah, he's only got 100 plus carries. The Bengals are
10 yards per carry right now.
Yeah, Bengals are fortunate to have both of those guys, and both of them bring different things, and that's kind of the beauty of it. But thank you for that question there. In our YouTube channel, you can join us every week in our YouTube chat room that we have, because we have this live stream of this show every week. So please do that. Submit fan questions, because we like to take those. You can hit us up on our Twitter account at Bengals OBI, the Orange and Black Insider Twitter account. You can send an email our way, the obinsider@gmail.com. You can download the show on iTunes, and I greatly encourage you to do so. Leave a review, leave a rating, and we love to hear feedback. You can also check out the show on SoundCloud and YouTube after the live feed if you need to do that. And we also post the show on Cincy Jungle and we thank them for allowing us to do that as well. Let's get out of here, guys. Before we do, Scott, what is your score prediction for the Bengals at Giants at MetLife Stadium on Monday night?
That's a good question. I'm going to say, and I don't know how well I've done with this. I know I got the last one wrong because I didn't.
We probably should start keeping track. Yeah, you know, might be a good idea.
So I'm going to say Bengals win. I'm going to go ahead and I think we're favored to lose. So anything I say is going to beat the spread. So I'm going to say Nugent actually makes a field goal. So let's say a few touchdowns, we get a field goal. So let's say 24. I don't know who they have kicking, or if they have a kicker.
Robbie Gould, I think.
So okay, he's pretty solid. I'll give them a field goal. I'll say 24. Let's go 13.
Bengals?
Yes.
Okay, wow. Okay. Bengals 11-point win in New York via Scott. So we'll probably need to start keeping track of that, like you said. Connor, your score prediction.
Oof. Bad Giants defense. Let's see. Offense, I think they'll score twice. I'll go 27-17.
In favor of?
Cincy.
Okay. Well, I'm going to wait the tomatoes and heads of lettuce probably thrown my way here because I'm going to go the other way. I don't believe in Marvin Lewis off of buys. I don't believe in Marvin Lewis in primetime, and I don't believe necessarily in this team this year at this point. And I hope to everything that they prove me wrong, and I hope that they pull out a win, and I hope that they can do a nice stretch in the last 8 games of the season here and make the playoffs. But they have not shown that they're a high caliber team yet this year. And so for that reason, I'm going to have them losing 28-24 to the Giants. If you want to send some hate.
Black Insider looking for a new host, but just on the down low.
Yep. I think Stephen A. Smith interviewed to come on the show, if I remember correctly.
I'd love to have him.
Yeah. Yeah. So, next week you might have another host. You might have Stephen A. Smith. You never know.
Please no.
But thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it. Great show. Great questions from the fans. We've had a handful of live viewers, which is awesome. Please keep doing that. As I mentioned, you can check out the show on a variety of different matters. Let's hope that Scott and Connor are correct this week, and I am incorrect as the Bengals take on the Giants on Monday Night Football. Enjoy the game. Try and be kind to each other based on the things that have gone on in America this week. And, let's get a win for the Bengals and get this ship righted. Okay?
Yeah.
Well, I think all the guys we've talked about, Gilberry, the linebackers, Gio and Hill, they're going to make the Bengals great again.
There you go. Look at that.
Seamless transition.
There you go. Wow. The king of the segue. Scott Schultz, everybody. I love it. All right, guys. Thanks. Who day, guys?
Who day?